Hello, I'm Meg Salyer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ward 6 Council show today. We have two of our greatest corporate civic leaders here in the community, Frank Merrick with Foundation Management. You manage an awful lot of money for folks and do such good work in the community, Frank. We're very grateful. And our dear friend Dan Strawn, who runs the Homeless Alliance. And today I wanted to talk about the Homeless Alliance, its origins, kind of how it came to being in the city, and then transition a little bit into all of the great work that we're doing, because sure. I have sort of discovered through some conversation over the last couple of months that I don't think our citizenry at large is as aware of all of the fantastic work that's going on to help those populations of people in our city really in need. So, Frank, this was kind of a unusual coming together of a few like minds.
It was. Back in 2002, Nick Noble from Oklahoma City with the Noble Foundation in Ardmore, myself and Bob Spinks, who was then the executive director of the United Way, had lunch at the Lunchbox, and we discussed how we were doing a poor job collaborating and funding agencies that serve the homeless. We were barely enabling people to maintain their homelessness, but not anything beyond that. Mm-hmm. So we put together a group of people. We traveled throughout the United States looking at how other cities addressed homelessness. We came back and were very fortunate to be able to hire Dan, and he became our first executive director.
First employee and
first
executive
employee.
Director. It's awesome.
I can't remember the exact year, Dan, but
2004. April
2004. And we began, the very first thing we did is got all the homeless shelters to sit down together and develop minimum standards.
And that was the first time that
never all sat down together before.
Around a table, right?
Yeah. So. And we developed minimum standards. We were instrumental in helping one particular gentleman find something else to do besides run a shelter here in town. We were able to identify and help hire a person who has taken that shelter over. Before the change, the health department was constantly closing them down. It was a horrible situation. And now it's one of our better shelters in town.
That's really wonderful. And we have so many. I mean, I think it's important to say right up front that we do have a very large group of very successful and helpful agencies and shelters scattered around the community.
Yeah. There's about 100 government, faith-based, and nonprofit agencies in Oklahoma City that are working with the homeless at one level or another, including 7 overnight shelters, but I'm also including in there, DHS works with homeless people, Social Security works with homeless people, the VA works with homeless people, and so you get agencies like that, agencies that do substance abuse treatment and mental health care, and of course agencies that do housing.
So from the city's perspective, we are so fortunate to have this nonprofit sector, social service-based agency that will help fill our gap, because the funding need is endless.
Yeah. And Meg, why we started was to get all those people together, talking to each other, working collaboratively. And I think from 2002 to 2016, I couldn't give you the exact numbers, but the state of homelessness in our city has gotten so much better. Mm-hmm. We have housed numerous people who before were either living on the streets or living in shelters. We're working very diligently with our veterans to make sure that they are in houses. And we have no authority, we have no power, but we convene.
Right. So the Alliance is the right word for it, because the Homeless Alliance is the place where everyone comes together and talks about problems. So, I want to delve into that a little bit more deeply, but my recollection, Frank, is that the community had a day shelter up until about 1995 or 96. Right. And then it went away after the bombing, probably for lack of funding resources.
Funding and other issues.
And so it was only once the Alliance was created and some funding became available through the
Neighborhood Stabilization
Program, I couldn't remember what we called it, to be able to create the campus that you now have that has a resource center on it, has a day shelter
Right.
on it, and now has some
Housing,
transitional
yeah,
housing,
yeah.
which is just fantastic.
And Meg, I'd like to give you a little bit of history about that.
Yeah.
We, as the Homeless Alliance, went around town trying to identify facilities that we could remodel and turn into a resource center and a day shelter. And every time we would identify a suitable place, not in my backyard, we don't want these people near us, we don't want that. So we contacted the Chamber of Commerce and said, help us, help you, and help our city to find a suitable location. And it was almost within a week.
Yeah, it was that day. Jim Couch, the city manager then and now, convened a group that included the chamber and us, and used the city's GIS software to find Westtown, basically. And
You know, I think that's probably another thing that people don't know so much is a role that the chamber would play. I think lots of people think the chamber spends all its time on big business, but
They were at the
solving
table from
homeless
day
issues
one.
Absolutely.
is
And the city.
important to big business,
Yes.
and it's important to small business. And I know that Frank, both you and Dan did a lot of work on identifying what the cost of homelessness was, and there's a story related to that.
Yeah, so we did a study in partnership with the City of Oklahoma City and the Coalition to End Poverty in 2010 for the total cost of homelessness to Oklahoma City, and that number was for that calendar year was $28 million, and more than half of that, more than 14 million, came from what we call non-obvious providers. So it's not us or Salvation Army or any of those groups. It's the police department, the fire department, IMSA, emergency rooms, city county jail,
Dan,
prison.
didn't you track one individual?
We did. So we were during the course of that study, we identified one chronically homeless man who, during the 1 year of the study, cost the community $160,000. One guy. And when we were interviewing him, he was in jail and had a lot of issues. And I remember talking to some of the leadership of the police department, and at that time Captain, now Major McCool, asked, "Is that Floyd?" And in fact, it was Floyd. And Steve, then Major McCool, told the story of Floyd was his first arrest for vagrancy and public drunk when he first started on the force 25 years before.
Oh my goodness.
So if we had left Floyd on the street for all those 25 years, which is likely, and he was costing us that, I mean, we could have built him a mansion for that.
He was $1 million guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that really spurred the community and the Homeless Alliance to really look at the cost of chronic homelessness, to look around the country for best practices for how to fix that problem, and to start what began as 100,000 homes and is now Journey Home.
Because that's really an important conversation. I think there's been a pretty significant paradigm shift in a lot of thinking, that early thinking, people need to get treatment first, get sorted out, and then transition into housing. And I've seen this major shift to say housing first.
Housing first, yeah.
So that you can wrap casework around them. So talk about how successful that's been. We have a specific program, I know, for veterans. And
yeah, so for the bulk of Oklahoma City's homeless population, that housing readiness approach, that addressing your issues and then moving into housing, that works really well. But for chronically homeless people with really high barriers to housing, it just doesn't work, and it doesn't work. It's not that it just doesn't work here, it doesn't work anywhere. And so in New York City, they developed a philosophy called Housing First, where you take those people directly off the street and without preconditions, put them into housing first, and then while they're safe and warm and secure, wrap them around with the services that they need to sustain their housing, whatever that is, employment, training, mental health care, substance abuse treatment, primary health care. Provide those to them while they're in housing. And so here in Oklahoma City, the Journey Home Collaborative, which is facilitated by us, but it includes 40 government, faith-based, and nonprofit agencies. that we've been very successful in drastically reducing the number of chronically homeless in Oklahoma City with a 90% housing retention rate.
Oh, that's just wonderful.
And we suspect if we gathered up the money to do another year-long cost of homelessness study, that would probably save the city about $6 million a year at a cost of a tenth of that.
Right. And helping so many people's lives.
Absolutely.
So, you just had what we call your point in time
Yes.
count. Tell us, we have just a few minutes, but
Sure.
tell us about that.
So every year the city does a snapshot census of its homeless population, and we just finished it the last week of January this year. The number's going to be in the neighborhood of 1,300, maybe a little lower than that. I think the real tale to tell is when we started in 2004, the point in time count was about 2,600.
Wow.
And now it's half that. And it's not a problem you can fix with a snap of your fingers, but as a community, we're moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And I think the conversation about expanded mental health services, and I mean, we know that all of these things are contributors. We also have data to know that there are some folks that just simply don't want to come off the streets. And
But that was a philosophy we took early on, Meg. We wanted to take people into the day shelter wherever they were.
Yep.
If they had been drinking or if they'd been using, didn't matter. If they weren't disruptive, we took them in. A lot of people self-medicate. Their feet hurt, their teeth are bad, mental health issues. We tried to reach out and touch each person that came in our door as often as they would allow us to start chipping away at the things that were causing them to be homeless. And we measure those touches every day. We measure how many referrals that they volunteer to go do, if it's mental health or drug and alcohol abuse, whatever. We never got in a hurry. We took people where they were, and we moved them as far as they wanted to go.
And I really can't say thank you enough for, first of all, the foresight of the coordination, because that was definitely lacking. And, we're an incredibly generous community. We know that in so many ways, but the resources are finite, and duplicative services of this type are not helpful.
Nope.
So the fact that, everybody sits around a table, I mean, I know that not long ago when we were anticipating some extremely cold weather and we had some changes in the number of beds that were available, you were the convening agency that brought people in to say, if we have a crisis in this community, what do we do? How do we address it? Yeah. How do we get corporate help putting backpacks together, of which I know we had many?
Yeah.
That is, in my opinion, Dan's greatest strength, is being able to get a lot of people with diverse ideas and opinions to sit down and create a common solution.
Well, Frank, I know you don't want me to say this, but I happen to remember that the funding for that property that is now the Westtown campus originated from your great help. And so the city,
Me and a lot of other people.
City's a partner in that effort
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely
helping
they
to
are.
retire that debt. But this has been one of the most successful, and certainly in my 6.5 years on the council, it's been one of the things that I've been most proud of, is to see the great progress that we've made in this area and the partnership that we all have together.
A lot more work to do, but we're gaining on it.
A lot more work to do. None of us are giving up yet.
Nope.
So thank you both for coming.
Bet.
I
It's my
appreciate it
pleasure.
so much. And I just am grateful for every day the work that's done.